You're what? My mother's voice cracked like a dish hitting tile. She stood frozen at the edge of the kitchen, her hands still dusted with flour from the cinnamon loaf she had been kneading just moments before. The smell of nutmeg and vanilla still hung in the air, clashing violently with the panic now rising in her throat. "I'm pregnant," I said again, quieter this time, as if volume could soften the blow. I held the test in my hand, two bold pink lines staring back like they were screaming. My chest tightened. I had rehearsed this moment, thought maybe I could explain it gently, walk them through it. But there was no easing into something like this. Not in the Whitmore household. Not with parents like Gregory and Linda. A chair scraped hard against the wood floor behind me. My father stormed in from the living room, the newspaper still crumpled in one hand. His face was already red. "Say that again." I didn't. He didn't wait. "You're pregnant?" "Jesus, Nora." His voice didn't even shake. It thundered. "What the hell were you thinking?" My mother gasped behind me, her hand flying to her mouth. She turned away as if my words were something filthy she couldn't look at. "How could you do this to us?" she whispered, and then louder, shrill now. "Do you have any idea what people will say?" "I didn't mean," I began, but my father's fist slammed the table. "Shut your mouth. You've shamed us. After everything we've given you, this is how you repay us." I could feel the walls of that neat little kitchen closing in. My breath was shallow. I looked at them, these people who had raised me, lectured me on morality and obedience, who preached about keeping up appearances, and I realized in that moment I didn't belong here anymore. "If you think we're going to help you raise someone else's mistake, think again," my father snapped, pushing his chair back so hard it nearly toppled. "You made your bed, Nora. Now lie in it. Get out." I stared at him, stunned. "You're kicking me out?" Just like that. "You are not my daughter," he said, each word landing like a blade. "Not right now. Not anymore." The floor beneath me didn't shake, but it might as well have. I didn't scream. I didn't plead. I just turned and walked upstairs, my ears ringing with silence and shame. I met Brady Carter when I was 16. He had the kind of smile that could light up a hallway, the kind of voice that made you lean in closer, even when you didn't need to. He played midfield for the varsity soccer team. But what made me fall for him wasn't his game. It was the way he listened, really listened, when I talked about my dreams. I told him I wanted to write novels. He told me he wanted to travel, to build something that mattered. We made promises between classes, scribbled our dreams in notebooks, and whispered about running away to Columbus after graduation, renting a crappy apartment and figuring it all out together. It felt unstoppable, like the kind of love that only burns that bright when you're too young to know better. Then came senior year. Then came college applications. And suddenly Brady had no time. The text slowed, the calls stopped. When we did meet, he talked only about Georgetown and Stanford, about his future. Never ours. Then, one chilly October afternoon, we were walking through the park near my house, leaves crackling under our sneakers, when he stopped mid-step. "Nora," he said, hands in his jacket pockets, "we need to talk." I already knew. My stomach twisted. He couldn't even look me in the eye. "It's just this isn't working anymore," he said. "I have plans, big ones. And this," he gestured vaguely between us, "it's holding me back." I opened my mouth to argue, to remind him of everything we'd said, all we'd planned. But when I met his eyes, they were already gone. "I'm sorry," he said. And that was it. He walked away without turning back. The wind picked up. My scarf slipped from my neck, but I didn't feel the cold. I just stood there in the dying light, arms wrapped around myself like it could hold me together. A week later, I was in the bathroom staring at the test in my shaking hands. And just like that, all the plans we'd made were gone. All the love, the laughter, the late-night phone calls gone. All that was left was me and two pink lines, and the sinking certainty that I was now completely, devastatingly alone. I packed in silence. There wasn't much to take. A few shirts, a worn-out hoodie, my old journal with the frayed edges and dried-out pen still clipped to the front. I stuffed them all into my duffel, careful not to cry too loud, even though there was no one left to hide my tears from. Downstairs, I could hear the low murmur of my parents' voices, tense, clipped, like they were talking about a stranger who'd just committed a crime inside their home. That stranger was me. The hallway outside my bedroom looked different that night. Colder, dimmer, like even the light bulbs were ashamed of me. I paused outside my door one last time, hand brushing the frame like it could give me strength. That's when I saw it, the family photo from 2 Christmases ago. Me, standing between my parents, all of us wearing matching red sweaters. I stared at it for a moment, then turned the frame face down and walked away. No one stopped me at the front door. No one even looked up when it clicked shut behind me. The October air bit at my skin. The street was quiet, just the occasional rustle of wind in the trees. I walked down the front steps, my breath fogging in the cold. It was almost midnight, and I had nowhere to go. Brady hadn't replied to a single message since the breakup. I'd texted him after the test, after the fight with my parents, after I got thrown out. Nothing. It was like he'd evaporated. I stood there on the sidewalk, duffel strap biting into my shoulder, trying not to panic. I had no plan, no money, no home, no idea what would happen in the next hour, let alone tomorrow. But I had one name in my head, Grandma Ruth. She wasn't close with my parents. After Grandpa died, she moved out to the edge of Maple Hollow, bought a rundown brick house, and mostly kept to herself. The last time I saw her was Christmas morning 2 years ago. She had brought homemade cranberry muffins and laughed too loud during dinner. I remember her squeezing my hand before she left and whispering, "If the world ever turns on you, baby girl, come find me. I've still got some fight left." I prayed she meant it. I walked to the gas station 2 miles away, used the payphone, and scraped together enough courage to dial her number. She picked up after 2 rings. Ruth speaking. My throat clenched. "Grandma, it's Nora." A pause. Not even a second. "You need a ride?" She met me at the bus depot an hour later. Her truck rumbled into the lot, headlights cutting through the cold. She stepped out in a thick knit cardigan and boots that had clearly seen better days. When she saw me, she didn't ask questions. She just wrapped me up in her arms and whispered, "You're safe now. You hear me? Safe." I cried so hard I couldn't speak. Her house was small and drafty, but it smelled like cinnamon and chamomile and something that felt like home. She made me tea, pushed a plate of cold meatloaf in front of me, and sat beside me without a single word of judgment. That night, I lay on her couch, a crocheted blanket pulled up to my chin, listening to the wind batter the windows. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't stop. Shame pulsed through every thought. I'd ruined everything, thrown away my future. And yet, as the old house creaked and my grandmother softly hummed down the hall, a strange thought crept in. Maybe this was where the real story began. Maybe being cut off wasn't the end. It was the start of something no one, not even me, could see yet. The next morning, I woke to the smell of bacon and eggs. Ruth was already up, fussing in the kitchen like she had a full diner to serve. She looked over her shoulder and grinned. "Sleep okay?" I nodded, still unsure how to exist in a place where no one was shouting. She poured coffee into a chipped mug and slid it toward me. "We'll figure this out, you and me," she said matter-of-factly. "Won't be easy, but Whitmore women don't break. We bend, and then we bounce back." I didn't say anything, but in my chest something shifted. A crack of light, a beginning. The days blurred into one another. Ruth's little house on the edge of Maple Hollow became a kind of sanctuary, not because it was quiet, but because it held no expectations, no judgment, no slamming doors or whispered disgrace. Just soft slippers on creaking floorboards and the distant hum of her radio, tuned to late-night jazz. She let me sleep in, let me cry, let me wander from room to room like a ghost, learning how to live again. And when the nausea came, the morning sickness, the fatigue, the moments of panic that gripped my chest when I remembered I was only 17 and already carrying a child, she never flinched. "I raised your daddy with less than this," she'd say with a raspy laugh, passing me ginger tea and a plate of dry toast. And he turned out all right mostly. I tried to believe her. On good days I did. By the time my belly began to show, the fear had morphed into something heavier. Not panic anymore, just weight. Literal and emotional. I spent long afternoons sitting on the porch swing, staring out at her frost-bitten rose bushes, wondering what kind of mother I was about to become. Would my child hate me for bringing them into the world like this? Would I be enough? Ruth never let those thoughts linger for long. "You got out," she said one night as we folded laundry on the couch. "You walked out of that house with nothing but your name and your baby. That's not weakness, Nora. That's power most people never find." I folded a onesie slowly, trying not to cry. It was in that tiny, cluttered house that I began to rebuild, not in grand gestures, but in little things. I got a job waitressing at a local cafe, Mabel's, a squat brick diner at the corner of Elm and Third. It wasn't glamorous. It barely paid, but it was something. A place to be useful. A way to scrape together a future 1-nickel tip at a time. Ruth gave me rides when I was too nauseous to walk, packed me leftover pot roast in Tupperware, and stayed up late reading baby books aloud in her crackling voice like it was scripture. We didn't talk about my parents. Not really. Every so often she'd mention them, in clipped, bitter tones, and I'd flinch, but she never pushed. She knew better than anyone what kind of man my father was, what kind of silence my mother had chosen. I was 6 months along when we picked out the name. We were sitting in the garden, bundling dried lavender into sachets to hang in the closets, when Ruth looked at me and said, "What about Micah?" The name hit me like a gentle gust of wind. "Micah," I repeated. "It's soft." "It's strong," she corrected. I smiled. He came in the middle of August, on a Tuesday morning so hot and thick it felt like the air itself was sweating. I was rinsing dishes in the kitchen sink when the first contraction hit. Sharp and low and unmistakable. I doubled over, hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Grandma!" Ruth burst through the back door in seconds, tossing her gardening gloves aside, keys already in hand. "Let's go, girl," she said, guiding me toward the truck. "This little man's on his way." The birth was long and hard and messy, just like every truth worth holding. But when they placed him on my chest, warm and wet and crying with a voice that already demanded the world take notice, I forgot every minute of the pain. "You're my joy," I whispered, brushing a finger down his cheek. "My secret." Micah, tiny fists clenched, eyes blinking up at me like he knew exactly who I was. Across the room, Ruth stood with her arms crossed and her face softening into a smile that almost cracked open the sky. "Well," she said gruffly, "he's got a head full of hair and a scream that could wake the dead. Definitely one of us." I laughed, a real laugh, shaky and broken and real. And in that small, sterile hospital room, with the hum of machines and the scent of antiseptic, I understood something I hadn't before. I wasn't just a girl who'd been cast out. I was a mother now, and that meant I had something to fight for, something no one could ever take from me again. Raising a child on waitress wages isn't romantic. It's survival. It's math that never quite adds up. Gas money or diapers, electric bill or formula. It's clipping coupons at midnight and praying your kid never realizes how close the line is between barely enough and nothing at all. Micah never knew. Not really. He thought grilled cheese sandwiches and second-hand picture books were the stuff of kings. He thought Ruth's garden was a jungle, and the creaky porch swing was a rocket ship. He never saw the way my hands blistered from washing dishes at Mabel's, or how I cried in the walk-in freezer, because tips were short that week. He just saw love, and God help me, I gave it to him with everything I had. Mabel's Cafe was no one's dream. It had a broken neon sign, sticky menus, and a cook named Vern who smoked behind the dumpster and cursed like it was a second language. But it was mine, a place I could show up to 6 days a week, pull on an apron, and build something not grand but solid, steady, real. The customers were regulars, farmers, retirees, tired truckers passing through. They liked me well enough, called me kiddo, handed me folded up bills, slipped extra quarters into the tip jar when they thought I wasn't looking. But no one ever looked at me like I was more than the girl behind the counter, until the day I spilled coffee on a stranger in a suit that probably cost more than my rent. I remember it like a punchline to a joke I didn't know I was part of. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon, summer, heat pressed through the windows like a second skin. The diner was quiet, just the hiss of the fryer and a fan trying its best. I was rushing with 2 pots of coffee when my foot caught on the corner of a chair. The pot jerked. Hot liquid arced through the air and landed squarely in the lap of a man reading the Wall Street Journal. Gasps. A dropped fork. Then silence. "Oh my God!" I stammered, grabbing napkins, my heart punching against my ribs. "I'm so sorry, sir, I didn't." He looked up. Sharp jawline, silvering hair, a suit too crisp for Maple Hollow. And then the impossible, he laughed. Like really laughed. Deep and unbothered, like someone who didn't just get drenched in diner-grade coffee. "It's all right," he said, waving off my frantic dabbing. I needed a reason to replace this suit anyway. I stared at him, dumbfounded. He offered his hand. Derek Vaughan. I didn't take it right away. I wasn't used to men like him. Men who didn't flinch at my baby bump, didn't glance at my left hand for a ring that wasn't there, didn't carry pity behind politeness. That day he tipped me $20 and said, "Next time I'll wear darker colors." I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. He came back the next day, and the next week, always in suits, always with a smile, always sitting in my section. He asked about the specials, about the town, about me, never in a way that felt like prying, just curious, present. One afternoon, he caught me watching Micah through the window as Ruth walked him home from preschool. I was wiping down the counter, distracted by the sight of his tiny backpack bouncing with each step. "Your son?" Derek asked. I nodded, wary. "He's lucky," he said. "Most kids don't grow up knowing they're somebody's entire universe." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. Over the weeks, he brought small things, a box of crayons for Micah, a dog-eared book of astronomy facts, daisies from the farmer's market wrapped in brown paper. I told myself not to get attached, but men like Derek didn't waltz into lives like mine without a reason. So I waited for the catch, the motive, the mask to slip. It never did. Instead, he listened. He laughed at my sarcasm, remembered my favorite pie flavor, never once made me feel like I was less for being young, poor, or mother without a ring. And one night, as we sat outside the diner beneath the flickering porch light, he looked at me, really looked, and said, "I don't want to save you, Nora. I just want to be where you are." The words hit harder than they should have, because no one had ever said that to me. Not my parents, not Brady, just this man with coffee-stained trousers and eyes that didn't flinch when they looked at my past. In that moment, something cracked open in me. Something big, something dangerous. Hope. The proposal didn't come with roses or violins or a sparkly ring hidden in a dessert. It came with rain. We were sitting on the front porch of Ruth's house, watching the thunder roll in over Maple Hollow, the sky bruised purple and slate. Micah was inside, curled on the couch with a book about sea creatures, his feet kicking against the armrest in that way he always did when he was deep in thought. Derek sat beside me, a blanket over both our laps, the scent of petrichor rising from the earth like something ancient and alive. He hadn't said much that evening, just held my hand quietly, his thumb brushing the back of mine like it meant something. Not flashy, not performative, just steady. "Nora," he said, his voice barely louder than the wind. "Marry me." I blinked, laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because I didn't know how else to hold the weight of those two words. You serious? I asked, turning to look at him. He nodded. I'm not offering rescue or reinvention. I'm just asking if you'll let me stay. In the mess, in the quiet, in all of it. No ring, no grand gesture, just the truth, raw and warm in his eyes. And that's what undid me, because after all these years of being left behind, by Brady, by my parents, by the people who looked at me and only saw mistake, here was someone offering presence, not escape. I have a son, I said quietly. I have a past, and I don't trust easy. I know, he said, and I'm still here. We married in Ruth's backyard under a string of fairy lights and a canopy of rustling trees. Micah wore a little suit and carried a bouquet of wildflowers down the aisle. Ruth cried and cursed in the same breath and baked 3 pies instead of a cake because no one trusts a cake that pretty anyway. It wasn't fancy. It was ours. After the ceremony, Derek pulled me aside and handed me a thick envelope. I frowned, confused, and opened it. Inside, a check, a number so large my breath caught. Derek? I know you've been saving for Micah's college since the day he was born, he said gently. This is to match it, not to take over, just to walk beside you like I promised. Tears burned behind my eyes. 15 years of tips, spare change, and sacrifice, and here was someone matching it, not to impress, but to believe in a dream I hadn't dared say out loud. That night, while Micah was asleep and Ruth was snoring in the recliner, I pulled out every dollar I'd ever tucked away, every faded bill, every rolled-up coin, and went into town the next morning. I ordered a jacket, not for me, for him. It was deep navy wool, sharp and fitted like the suits he wore, but with a soft corduroy collar, a nod to that first day in the diner when I ruined his expensive one. Inside the lining, stitched by hand, I asked the tailor to sew a single phrase, "Thank you for staying." Time passed. Micah grew. Too fast. He aced science competitions, stayed up late, sketching circuits and constellations, asked questions I could barely keep up with. By 12, he was building solar-powered fans out of scrap. By 16, he had a framed scholarship letter hanging over his bed. He didn't just carry potential. He radiated it. When he got accepted into Johns Hopkins for pre-med, I wept on the porch swing where Derek had proposed, the same one that creaked every time Ruth dropped into it with a mug of tea and a story about the old days. You did this, she said, patting my knee. All those years you thought you were drowning. You were building a boat. Then came the graduation. Top of his class. Golden stole. That same quiet smile he'd had as a baby, full of wonder and just a little bit of mischief. He hugged me tight after the ceremony, his voice low in my ear. I hope I make you proud. I pulled back, cupped his face, and said, You were my reason before you ever earned a grade. We thought the past was buried. We thought we had outrun it. But the past has a way of showing up at your door when you least expect it. And for us, it arrived in the form of a man in a hospital gown, a patient, a stranger, with my son's eyes and my father's voice. It started like any other phone call. I was folding laundry in the living room, the hum of the dryer mixing with the low murmur of a cooking show Ruth had left on in the background. The sun streamed in through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the floorboards, and for once, everything felt still, peaceful. Then the phone rang. I answered without looking at the caller ID, still smoothing out a t-shirt. Hello. Mrs. Vaughn. The voice was male, polite, measured. Not Derek, not Micah. This is she. I'm calling from St. Andrew's Clinic. Your son, Dr. Micah Vaughn, asked me to pass along a message. He had a patient today, and the gentleman would like to speak with you. Personally. My spine straightened. Why? The nurse hesitated. He said he believes he knows you, that you're family. My stomach turned. I hung up without another word. Micah called later that night. His voice was quiet. Careful. Mom, do you know a Gregory Whitmore? The name hit me, like a backhand across the face. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in over 20 years. Not since the night he told me I was no longer his daughter. Not since he threw me into the cold with nothing but a duffel bag and a broken heart. I sat down slowly, gripping the phone like it might shatter. He's my father. There was a pause. He's my patient. I closed my eyes. Of course he was. The universe didn't forget. It waited. It turned, slowly, deliberately, until its hands pointed back at you. What does he want? Micah exhaled. He didn't recognize my name at first. Just said he was curious about the doctor who fixed his shoulder. Then he asked about my mom, where I was from, what kind of woman raised a surgeon. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Now he wants to know. Micah's voice shifted, firmer, protective. I told him he doesn't get to want anything, but he begged, said he needed to see you, said he made mistakes. Mistakes, I whispered, staring at the walls of the life I'd built. Every inch paid for with tears and grit. Is that what he's calling them now? Micah was quiet for a beat, then said something I hadn't expected. I'll bring him, if you say yes. And even more unexpected, I said okay. The day they arrived, the wind had a bite to it. Autumn again, same as the season they threw me out. The trees lining our street in Maple Hollow were turning gold, their leaves whispering down like tiny confessions. I stood on the front porch, watching their car pull in. Derek stood behind me, silent but steady, his presence a wall at my back. Ruth was inside, slicing apples for a pie she insisted was just coincidence, though we all knew better. Micah stepped out first, tall and sure, his white coat traded for a flannel and jeans. Then he opened the passenger door. Gregory Whitmore emerged slowly. He looked older, of course, thinner, grayer, leaning slightly to one side, but his eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, sharp with guilt he hadn't figured out how to carry. Next to him was Linda, my mother. Her eyes were red, her face pale and puffy. She looked like someone who had finally realized the price of silence. I didn't move. Micah walked up the steps, his voice low. You okay? I nodded too quickly. Fine. Everything's fine. But my hands were shaking. I turned toward them. My parents. The ghosts of my old life. They looked at me like I was something unfamiliar, not foreign, just unreachable. Nora, my mother said softly. You look so strong. I said nothing. Gregory tried to smile. It didn't reach his eyes. We just wanted to say. Micah stepped between us. Let me introduce you properly, he said, his voice hardening. This is my mother, Nora Whitmore Vaughn. She raised me. She fought for me. And she made me who I am. This, he gestured around him, this is her world. You don't walk into it unless she opens the door. They looked stunned. Good. I tilted my head, measured them for a long moment, then finally spoke. If you're here for redemption, I said slowly, you are 20 years late. But if you're here to acknowledge what you did, to own it fully, then maybe, just maybe, I'll let you sit down for tea. Linda began to cry. Gregory looked like the wind had been knocked out of him. Micah didn't look at either of them. He only looked at me, and in that moment I knew one thing for certain. Blood may tie people together, but loyalty? Loyalty is earned. We sat in the living room, for people who used to be a family. The tea Ruth had made was still steaming, untouched. The scent of cinnamon and apple lingered in the air, but no one reached for their cup. Micah sat beside me on the couch, his hand loosely resting on my shoulder. Derek stood by the window, arms crossed, his gaze unwavering as he observed everything like a man watching a negotiation with stakes too high for comfort. Ruth, bless her, stayed in the kitchen, slicing fruit like she didn't hear every word through the thin walls of the house she'd fought to keep warm all these years. Gregory and Linda sat perched on the edge of the love seat like the cushions might reject them. Neither one of them spoke at first. I let the silence stretch. I'd waited 20 years for this moment, they could wait a few minutes longer. My father was the one to finally break. Nora, I came to say I was wrong. About everything. We both were. His voice was lower than I remembered, raspier, as if guilt had frayed it at the edges. I stared at the steam rising from his tea, curling like smoke from a fire long put out. You didn't just make a mistake, he continued. You made a life. You made a son. And from what I see, you've raised him into a man any father would be proud of. Linda nodded silently beside him, eyes damp, fingers knotted together like prayer. I didn't answer right away. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I looked at them the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, analyzing the fracture lines, wondering if what's broken is even worth fixing. Micah is everything I never thought I deserved, I said slowly, my voice even. He's brilliant. He's kind. And he's the only reason I'm even listening to this. My mother opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. You don't get to rewrite what happened. You don't get to call it a misunderstanding or a lapse in judgment. You abandoned me when I was 17 and pregnant. You left me with nothing but a duffel bag and the echo of a slammed door. You didn't just break my heart, you buried me. And now you're here, 20 years later, asking to share a table you tried to burn down. Linda sniffled, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't know how to fix it. We didn't know how to reach you. I tilted my head, the anger cold in my chest, not blazing anymore, just steady. You didn't try. You knew where Ruth lived. You knew where I worked. You just didn't want to look bad to your friends in town. You chose your pride over your daughter. And now you want your grandson to look at you like you're something other than strangers. Gregory looked away, shame finally catching up to him. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle it. I thought I was doing what was right, teaching you a lesson. I laughed then, a bitter sound that cracked through the room. You taught me a lesson, all right. You taught me that love has limits, that home isn't a place you can count on, that the people who are supposed to protect you might be the ones who throw you to the wolves. I took a deep breath, let the silence settle again, and then leaned forward. But here's what you don't get. I didn't just survive what you did to me. I built a life from it, a damn good one, with a husband who respects me, with a son who knows what unconditional love actually feels like, with a family who chose me. And I am not going to let you walk in here and poison that with regret, dressed up as reconciliation. Micah looked at me, eyes wide but proud. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. This was my reckoning, my moment, my choice. I finally turned to him. Do you want to get to know them? I asked softly. He paused, looked between me and the people who once left me for dead. I want to know the whole story, he said, but I already know who my family is. Then he reached over and took my hand again, and for the first time in 2 decades, the weight on my chest eased just enough for me to breathe. I stood. You may stay for tea. You may ask questions, but you don't get to rewrite history. Not in this house. They both nodded, subdued. Derek finally uncrossed his arms and moved toward me. You okay? He murmured. I nodded. I'm better than I've ever been. Outside, the wind rustled the marigolds in Ruth's garden, carrying the sound of peace hard-earned. The rest of the visit unfolded like a truce in a war. No one had really one. My parents stayed for tea. They asked questions, soft, cautious ones, about Micah's childhood, about his schooling, his favorite books. I let them. I answered when I felt like it, deflected when I didn't. There were long silences between sentences, but no one filled them with fake warmth or second-hand apologies. Ruth didn't join us, but I caught her peeking in once from the kitchen door, eyes narrowed like a hawk watching wolves near her den. Derek stayed seated close, not possessive, but protective in the quiet, grounded way only he knew how to be. At one point, Linda pulled a folded envelope from her purse. These are some photos of you when you were little. I thought you might want them. I took it, placed it on the coffee table, and didn't open it. I wasn't ready to look at a girl who still thought love was permanent just because it shared her last name. Gregory tried again later to offer some explanation, some diluted version of accountability. We didn't know how to handle it, Nora. You were always our pride, our perfect girl. And when you came home with news we didn't know how to face, we failed. I failed. I didn't interrupt. I just looked at him, really looked, and said, "You didn't fail because you made a mistake. You failed because you left me to pay for it alone." When they finally stood to leave, Linda hesitated at the door. "Do you think we could see you again? Maybe talk more next time?" I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I simply held the door open and replied, "That depends on whether you're coming back for me or for your own guilt." She nodded, eyes stinging with the answer she didn't want to hear, and then they were gone. Micah lingered at the window long after their car had disappeared down the street. His arms were crossed, his posture thoughtful, not tense. He didn't speak until the last of the dust had settled. "They don't feel like strangers," he said quietly, "but they don't feel like family either." I stepped beside him, watched the emptiness of the road with him. "That's because blood is just biology," I murmured. "Family is what you survive with." He turned to me then. "Did it ever get easier, carrying all that pain?" My breath caught a little. I thought about late nights in Ruth's kitchen, the taste of cold leftover stew, the sound of bills stacking higher than hope. I thought about Derek's hand on mine the night he proposed, about Micah's first day of kindergarten when he didn't look back, not even once. I thought about waking up each morning with more resolve than rest. "No," I said truthfully, "but it made me stronger than I ever knew I could be." Micah nodded slowly. "I want to know more. About who you were, who you had to become." His words weren't invasive. They were a gift. He wasn't asking to unearth the past out of curiosity. He was asking to honor it. So I told him. That night, with Ruth snoring in the recliner and Derek dozing in the armchair with a book on his chest, I told Micah the truth. Not just the timeline, but the texture of it, the fear, the nights I cried so hard I thought I'd go deaf, the anger, the pride, the way his first laugh in the hospital room had felt like church bells ringing in my chest. He listened without interrupting, like the scientist he was, gathering data to better understand the miracle in front of him. When I finished, he didn't hug me right away. He just whispered, "You didn't just raise a doctor, Mom. You raised a witness." I smiled then, tired but at peace. That's all I ever wanted. Later, when the house was quiet again, I stood alone on the porch. The wind had picked up, stirring the trees that lined Ruth's garden. The sky above Maple Hollow was endless and dark, dotted with stars that hadn't changed in 20 years, even though I had. I closed my eyes and let the air wash over me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had something to prove. I had my son. I had my home. I had survived the kind of abandonment that should have broken me. And now, I had boundaries, not to keep people out, but to protect everything I had fought like hell to build. People think the worst kind of pain is being left behind. And for a while I believed that too. But I've learned something far quieter, far sharper. The worst pain is being erased, told that your worth ends where someone else's comfort begins, that your voice doesn't matter, that your love is conditional, disposable. They tried to erase me. My own parents, the boy who once promised forever, even the town in its small, suffocating way, tried to reduce me to a cautionary tale. But I didn't disappear. I endured, and in that endurance, I built something stronger than any apology could ever replace. A home, a son, a life where love isn't withheld like a privilege, but given like breath, freely, fully, without fear. Forgiveness? It's not a door I owe anyone. It's a garden I choose to tend on my own terms with my own hands, and sometimes it stays locked, not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. You don't need a perfect past to deserve peace. You don't need blood to define family. What you need is someone who shows up, in the hard moments, in the silent ones, in the ones no one claps for. I used to chase the version of me they loved, quiet, compliant, clean, but the woman I am now, she's fierce, she's flawed, she's full, and she is not going anywhere. So if you've ever been cast out, if you've ever had to rebuild from the ashes of someone else's shame, remember this: your story isn't over. It's just yours now. And that's the most powerful kind of ending there is.